Parliament returns this week, and while the government is bracing for an interest rate rise, both the Liberal and National parties are riven by infighting. The leadership of both parties is being furiously debated, and there's still no sign of any coalition reunion. Deputy Liberal leader Ted O'Brien joins us this morning. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. A small group of Conservative Liberal men met on Thursday to discuss the fate of the party's leadership. It was an extraordinary scene. The next day, Andrew Hastie ruled out running, clearing the way for Angus Taylor. Across the factions, Liberals aren't expecting Susan Lee to face a challenge this week, but a move is still expected at some point in the coming months. The party remains stuck in a loop of instability. Meanwhile, Nationals leader David Littleproud will face a challenge tomorrow, but he looks more certain to survive for now. All this with interest rates tipped to rise after a jump in inflation, something that should have the government on the back foot.
Susan Lee is refusing to acknowledge her crumbling authority.
I have the confidence of my team.
Standing her ground as Conservative challengers circle.
I'm not going to make any comments about that.
The Liberal Party has got a lot of work to do.
Susan absolutely has my support.
What people want is leadership. They don't want tantrums.
We've got an obligation to focus on Labor's cost of living crisis.
A fresh financial setback for millions of Australians tonight.
Inflation ticked up today in unwelcome but unsurprising ways.
With speculation of a second hike in May.
For millions of Australians, this will hit incredibly hard.
If you look at today's data, none of it can be attributed to the budget settings.
If the Treasurer of Australia cannot accept responsibility for the problem, he cannot be relied upon to fix it.
There's been a shake-up in the preferred Prime Minister polls.
Oh, hello!
In second place now, it's Pauline Hanson on 26%.
There's nothing stopping us from being opposition first, then working our way towards government.
We are going over the political cliff.
A rogue backbencher launches an extraordinary bid to topple his leader.
I will be moving a spill motion. David has made some bad decisions recently. He's upset just about everybody.
I stand by my record as leader and what our party room has achieved.
I'd have more chance of captaining the Australian cricket team than Colin Boyce would to lead the Nationals.
I offer an alternative. It's that simple.
I like Colin as a bloke, but he won't win the leadership.
It's a kind of a bin fire of far-right personality politics.
A secret meeting involving Susan Lee's leadership rivals has cast a shadow.
The meeting, just hours before the memorial of their former colleague, Dr. Katie Allen, has been slammed.
It could just be colleagues catching up. I don't really know.
I don't think it was an entirely edifying moment. Certainly for a secret meeting, it wasn't so secret.
Breaking news for you, Andrew Hastie will not be contesting for the Liberal Party leadership.
Oh, look, they're a mess. That's the truth.
And we're joined on the panel this week by Phil Coorey, political editor with the Australian Financial Review, Clare Armstrong, the chief digital political correspondent for the ABC, and Waleed Aly, broadcaster and columnist with the 9 newspapers. Very good morning to all of you.
Dave.
So the Pollies will be arriving back here in Canberra this afternoon ahead of and tomorrow ahead of Parliament, Phil, and things are clearly far from settled, aren't they, in either the Liberal or the National Party?
Yeah, I've not seen it like this. We're both former coalition partners are sort of riven with instability, but especially the Liberal Party. So I think status check, David, Parliament sits on Tuesday for the first time, but when the Andrew Hastie pulling out of the leadership contest on Friday clears the way for Angus Taylor to have a run. So there's this inevitability that it will happen at some stage.
But not this week?
Not this week. We're now hearing, well, the original reasons not to act stand, that is A, there's probably going to be a rate rise on Tuesday or a strong indication of one coming, and they don't want to get in the way of that. That'll be a bad day for the government. B, you don't knock off a leader at the start of a sitting fortnight, because you're sitting there laid bare with no front bench and a leader who's never led before, and you can just be excoriated over the next couple of weeks. But the main reason is they don't have the numbers.
Well, I was going to say, Steve, you don't have the numbers.
So I think both camps were sort of in broad agreement on Friday that it was only a couple of votes in it, but nothing's really shifted over the weekend, and I think they want. It could take a while. I mean, there's still a lot of hesitancy about moving Angus Taylor, especially amongst the moderates, about deposing the first female leader. And those pictures we just saw there that were taken by Liam Mendes, the blokes. So it's headed one way, but when, who knows?
Claire, these pictures in this meeting, the Conservative Breakfast Club meeting there in Melbourne. What was going on, and how did these scenes go down across the party?
I do like that in that photo by Liam that at least Patterson looks a bit sheepish about the entire situation, because how astonishing it was. There was a decision made earlier in the week as Angus Taylor got closer to Australia. We know he'd been holidaying in Europe, and it had long sort of felt like the closer that he got to Australia, the more this really slowed down as the sort of older hands started taking charge of what had been quite a hurried attempt at the leadership led by Hastie and his inner circle. We then had a situation where this face-to-face meeting is conceived of and ends up being tacked onto the memorial of a former colleague, which is an astonishing turn of events. It speaks to how much they overthought it. I think that they thought a clandestine meeting in suburban Melbourne would have been less problematic than maybe just bumping into each other in the Qantas lounge on the way to the funeral. I really don't understand that logic. But so they get there. We know Hastie arrived with a bit of an entourage. Taylor a bit after. Michael Sukkar, not photographed, was present at the meeting, ostensibly to sort of power broke the situation. Supporters of Hastie are pretty bruised right now. They feel that they were essentially ambushed in this meeting, where they had obviously, maybe naively and reflecting maybe their political experience, felt that what people were telling them in terms of Hastie's support was real. And I think they found out pretty quickly in that meeting it was not. They never ended up doing a deal, the two. Hastie very clearly did not want that to be transactional.
No, they haven't come out of this with a ticket.
But obviously it's emerged within 24 hours, Hastie withdrawing, acknowledging he doesn't have the support of the party room, which to me I read just as much as doesn't have the support of the majority of the right faction of the party room.
I'm told there are still some of those Hastie supporters bruised, as you say, not yet on board with Angus Taylor necessarily. There's an expectation they'll get there over time. The Conservative wing of the party is roughly around 21. The moderates are roughly around 18. Depends how you count some people, but there's a block in the middle that really will matter. Those who are unaligned, or there are about 12 of those. So, and they're at the moment not expected to be on the Taylor side. So that's keeping Susan Lee.
I think it's important too that if you are going to, if there is going to be a spill, it's important to have an emphatic result. Not always. Tony Abbott beat Malcolm Turnbull by one vote and consolidated from there. But if you want to, want to end this thing, but don't underestimate Susan Lee and.
Well, this is the thing, and a lot of Libs don't want to reward the National Party for what's just happened.
Exactly.
But
can I just? What's extraordinary though about the fact that the numbers aren't there, is that the very first vote was tight, and of what was the margin? 4?
25, 29.
And of those, 3 are no longer in the party room. One because she wasn't in the end meant to be there anyway, because it was Bradfield and so.
Giselle,
So after all this, nothing? No, like things, you're down to a margin of 1, and that hasn't been overcome yet. It's I don't know. It just seems like there's this gridlock that seems to be there, and I understand Angus Taylor's working to overcome that, but that is extraordinary.
It is. No, it's a fair point. I think for now, though, I think even amongst some moderates, there's a view that Susan Lee needs to be given more time, possibly until the budget in May, but there's a view that this isn't going to last, and the polls will if they continue to be as bad as they are, that's going to be the problem. But what do you make, Waleed, of Andrew Hastie pulling out? He was the more, riskier choice, I suppose, in some ways. Yes, more cut through, but represented more provocative views on things like immigration and so on. Is it now a more conventional choice between a Susan Lee and an Angus Taylor for the party?
Yeah, it is. And Angus Taylor's camp was positioning him that way in order to win moderate support. So within the factions, the moderates looking at someone like Andrew Hastie and going, we can't do that. Angus Taylor's saying, no, this is the way in which, we'll strike a slightly different pose. We'll run hard on cultural issues perhaps, but maybe the economic story will be different. And it's worth remembering just how far from the established Liberal tradition Andrew Hastie's economic argument is. So that would be a big shift. Perhaps ironically though, Andrew Hastie probably scares Labor a bit more, not because they think he's where the mainstream of Australia is, but because it's unpredictable.
I think
it's a huge intervention. Whereas Angus Taylor, if he were to take over, there's something there that Labor's familiar with.
They've already got their lines.
Yeah, exactly. And so it becomes a much easier situation. Now, it is possible that under a Hastie leadership, the coalition could have gone out backwards, right? That is possible. It's high risk, high reward, but that's the scenario we face, and obviously that's the way the
Latham option. Hail Mary.
Well, time to talk to the Deputy Liberal Leader and the Shadow Treasurer, Ted O'Brien. And to take us there, here's someone who's studied closely the Liberal Party for many years, John Roscombe from the Institute of Public Affairs, speaking to 7:30.
The Liberal Party is in an existential crisis. It has been challenged traditionally from the left with the rise of the Teals. It's now being challenged from the right. The closest parallel that I think there is to what's happening now is what occurred to the Liberals in the 1980s following the Bob Hawke ascendancy. The battle between the wets and the dries took over a decade to resolve itself. It's not clear what the Liberal Party stands for in 2026, and it's not clear what the purpose of the Liberal Party is.
Ted O'Brien, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
I'll come to the purpose of the party, but do the Liberals or the Nationals honestly look like a bunch of people who could run the government right now?
Well, I'll leave that for those on the couch, your distinguished panel, to run a commentary on how we're looking, David, but there's no doubt that we are stronger when we are together. And I've been making that very clear over recent days. And hopefully the coalition will come back, but that's got to be at the right time. And we've got to go through a process. That process to date, since David Littleproud announced the split, I haven't found anybody in the Liberal Party who's disagreed with the judgments or decisions taken by Susan Lee. And I have faith in her navigating through this next phase as she keeps the door open to see if there is a way we can return.
Well, OK, you have faith in Susan Lee. Is she, in your view, the best person to lead the Liberal Party?
Yes, she is. She has my support. I believe she has the support of the majority of the party room.
Have you spoken to Angus Taylor, and do you know if he will be challenging for the leadership?
I speak to all of my colleagues, but I never disclose individual conversations, David. What I can say is Angus has continued to make positive contributions, especially in the leadership team over recent days and weeks. As for whether or not there'll be a challenge, I don't believe we're walking into a sitting period where there will be, but I don't know the future either. Of course, the convention is if one does not support the leader, they step aside. Angus hasn't done that, so my running assumption is he continues to support Susan Lee in her leadership.
That's your assumption. You're the deputy leader, though. You can't pick up the phone to Angus Taylor and get more than an assumption. Can you ask him as deputy leader, are you challenging for the leadership?
I don't go through individual conversations, David, but Angus is very aware, as is everybody in Shadow Cabinet, that if you do not support the leader, you let the leader know and you stand aside. He hasn't done that, and therefore I think it is fair to assume that Susan Lee continues to enjoy his support.
Was it appropriate for Angus Taylor and other shadow ministers to be holding a meeting to discuss the leadership?
David, I don't want to add to speculation by engaging in hypotheticals about what colleagues may or may not have spoken about in a meeting that I myself did not attend. I know there's been a lot said, including this morning. I was listening to Phil's comments and others. Look, I'll let others make the commentary. I don't ever make a running commentary on colleagues or the conversations they might have.
But
that is a matter for them to answer if you ask them individually.
But I mean, come on, you know what they were talking about. We all know what they were talking about. They were talking about who should run as leader or run as a candidate against the leader. As deputy leader, are you saying that's okay?
I'm making it clear, David, that I wasn't in that conversation, and if you have more insights to reveal, I don't want to hold you back, go for it. Colleagues have conversations all the time. I know a lot have been said about that particular meeting they conducted. What
so
the
you
outcome
seriously
was,
don't know what they were talking about?
I do not know the ins and outs of that conversation, David. Can I ask you, do you know what was said?
Well, I've spoken to, yes, they were talking about the leadership. I think we all know that. You honestly don't know that they were talking about the leadership?
I'll allow you to explain what they were speaking about, David. I wasn't there. I'm not going to pretend I know. And I'm not going to come on your show and try to make things up for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, but
I wasn't in the meeting. I don't know, period.
All right. Would it be appropriate, in principle, for shadow ministers who are meant to be supporting the leader to be having a meeting that does discuss a plot on the leadership?
It is appropriate for any shadow minister who does not support the leader to let the leader know and to stand aside from shadow cabinet.
Okay.
To date, that has not happened in this case. That is why I say that the running assumption, as far as I'm concerned, is Angus Taylor therefore continues to support Susan Lee.
If there is a spill of the leadership, will you put your hand up for the top job?
No, I'm the shadow treasurer, and that is my absolute focus. We have Australians right now feeling poorer by the day. We have an economy that is getting weaker. That is my absolute focus as the shadow treasurer.
On the reunification of the two parties, we just heard you say earlier that you certainly want the parties to come back together. You've been, as I understand it, working behind the scenes, amongst a few others, trying to get things back together. Will we see a reunification this week?
Well, let's wait and see, David. I don't want to be preempting anything. I was deeply disappointed when David Littleproud took the decision to split from the coalition, because I do believe it's in the national interest that we work together. That's always been the case, and my view hasn't changed in that regard. But you can't just come back together willy-nilly and hope for the best. There are some serious conversations that need to be had. Susan reached out to David early last week because there is going to be a spill in the National Party room. David wanted to postpone conversations for this coming week. That's fair enough. Of course, Susan accepted that. So we'll wait until the National Party meeting is over tomorrow, and then, of course, discussions can begin.
So the two leaders you expect will meet after tomorrow's National Party leadership issue?
Precisely when, I can't tell you, David, but yes, that's my expectation. I do believe that they will meet and they'll be having discussions. We know that we've got one key job to do right now, and that's hold this very poor government to account. Now, the Liberal Party can indeed do that alone. We have an enormous depth of talent. But history has shown we do it best when we work in conjunction with the National Party. That's my view. But of course, there's a lot of discussions yet to be had. So let's wait and see what this week delivers.
I'm interested in these two, Susan Lee, David Littleproud, sitting down together after all that's been said and done over the last couple of weeks. Will you as Deputy Leader need to chaperone them? What's that dynamic like?
I wouldn't be suggesting I need to chaperone the leaders of two great parties, David. At the end of the day, both David and in particular Susan know that they work in one interest, and that is the national interest. And there's a lot of talk about, saving the coalition and all of this sort of thing. Ultimately, there's one job to do, and that is to save Australia from a very poor government. Save Australians who are now starting 2026, knowing prices are soaring. Interest rates will probably go up, taxes go up, living standards go down, real wages go down. That's the key focus for both the Liberal Party and the National Party. Now, of course, there's going to be discussions about whether or not we prosecute those issues as a united coalition or we do it separately. And I have absolute faith that Susan will be able to navigate those conversations with David over the week ahead.
There are some of your colleagues, I'm not saying this is a majority view, but some Liberals who would rather remain separated for the rest of this term, to go to the election as a party focused more on winning back all those urban voters and seats that have deserted the Liberal Party, win back some of the talent like Keith Wallahan, for example, and then in the next term look at reunifying with the National Party. What do you say to that sort of thinking?
I don't look at it as a binary choice like that, David. What I look at is the fact that we've got a very poor government being led by Anthony Albanese and a Treasurer who won't face up to his responsibilities in Jim Chalmers. The question we have to ask ourselves is how best we hold them to account. Now, there are different ways of doing it. Because of the depth of Liberal Party talent, there is no doubt we could absolutely prosecute those issues and hold the government to account alone. But, as I said before, ultimately history has shown that we do it best when we do it with the National Party. So again, let's just wait to see what happens.
Okay.
I don't think it's a binary choice of either saying separated and reuniting after the next election or doing it now. It's an open door from Susan Lee. If David Littleproud is prepared to walk in, which I believe he is, they'll have discussions and I'm sure together they'll come through with the best approach moving forward.
My understanding is the Prime Minister has not made a decision yet on whether all of the opposition staff will just go to the Liberal Party if you remain separated, or whether they will be broken up across not just the Liberal Party but the Nats and the rest, because it's 28 Libs and 28 now on the crossbench. Should the Liberal Party be getting all of those opposition staff?
Well, it doesn't surprise me the Prime Minister hasn't made a decision, David, because it's all about politics for him. Let's not forget that this Prime Minister cut the resources, cut the staffing of the opposition at the beginning of this term. This is the sort of internal game playing of Anthony Albanese.
So give the Nats none, is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is there's one thing we can be sure of. Anthony Albanese will play politics like he always does.
So this would be playing politics. To give the Nationals any staff would be playing politics.
David, they're your words, not mine.
No, it's a question.
My words are this. When it comes to resourcing, the Prime Minister will do whatever he thinks is in his personal best political
So the Liberals
interest.
should get the lot?
What that is,
should the Liberals get the lot?
Mine.
Is that what you're saying?
Your guess is as good as mine,
I'm just asking
David.
what you think should happen.
We have a big week ahead. What I think should happen is this week we should see Susan Lee and David Littleproud working through the issues and deciding how we move forward. That's my focus. Can I say, though, that's my secondary focus. My primary focus is holding this poor government to account, because out in the real world, David, mums and dads of Australia are dropping their kids to school this last week and they are feeling poorer. They've had to buy, school uniforms, textbooks, all these sort of things. The bills are going through the roof. They're looking at 2026, despite all the promises of the Albanese government. 2026 will see them poorer than 2025.
I want to ask you about inflation.
That's the real issue.
Just one more
that's the issue I'm focusing on.
One more on the Liberal Party, the direction of the party. I mean, what do you think, Ted O'Brien, the Liberal Party should be focusing on? Which voters in particular, which direction should your party be going in?
I believe that the Liberal Party is best when we are united, we are values-led, we are future-focused, and we are economically driven. And there's nothing more important than that economy. Not because the economy is the end game, David. It is the means by which we can serve the Australian people better. It's the means by which a strong economy is how you can help those mums and dads who are struggling to pay the mortgage. You can help those mums and dads who are struggling to pay the school fees. That is where the Liberal Party has had its traditional strength. And we need to continue to be that values-led, the belief in the individual, the family, the entrepreneur. These are the things, the people we need to focus on. And future focus, we need to focus in particular on millennials, on Gen Zs, on alphas. They're the demographic, if you like, who are struggling the most.
So there's a lot of groups there that you want to appeal to. Let's talk about how you're doing that. You mentioned the inflation challenge. We've seen inflation pick up and there's an expectation of a rate rise on Tuesday. What plans have you come up with to tackle that?
Well, as I said a few times already, David, the number one focus is for us to keep this government to account. We're not even 12 months into this term of government. The next election is well over 2 years away.
But is this the problem? Do you need to put some ideas out there so people know what you stand for?
Well, I've already laid out some of the basic principles of the party, but when it comes to the economy, David, here's what we do stand for. Unlike the Labor Party, we believe that the Treasurer should have some measurable rules to contain his spending in the budget. Every Treasurer since Peter Costello has had quantifiable rules to contain spending, except Jim Chalmers. A coalition government would absolutely introduce fiscal rules because this Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, keeps spending. This is the highest spending government in 40 years.
Wasn't the Howard government the highest spending in 2004-5?
This is the highest spending government in 40 years, David. And this Treasurer has no rules. So he continues to spend. So government spending, for example, is growing at 4 times the pace of the Australian economy through to the end of last financial year. 4 times the pace. And this is what's happening. Because he keeps spending money, government is pouring more money into the economy. The economy can't handle it. And so the RBA is being forced to try to suck money out by raising interest rates.
So that's the loop.
He has to control his spending.
You and Susan Lee have committed to cut taxes further. Wouldn't that put even more money into the economy, into people's pockets?
Well, you've got to look at the holistic picture here, David. One of the problems we have with the government spending so much is they're not looking for offsets. Again, I go back to the mum and dad who were dropping the kids off at school last week. If they decide they want to put a child into extracurricular activity, you know, sport, dance, whatever, they might have to cut back on the takeaway dinners and so forth. Families are living within their means. The Albanese government refuses to do that. It keeps spending, but it does not find offsets within its budget to pay for that spending.
But to be fair, the Liberal Party has kept supporting a lot of this spending. I mean, even the latest health spending, the extra $25 billion announced on Friday, you guys are backing it.
2/3 of the additional spending this year by the Albanese government, reflecting, you know, comparing it to when the coalition was in, 2/3 is all discretionary items. You know, it's not pressures like health and education and social welfare. That counts for about 1/3. 2/3 of their additional spending are discretionary spends. Now, they have a right, every government is entitled to decide their priorities, but they also have a responsibility to find room for those priorities in the budget. It's not the responsibility of the government to identify how they want to spend the money, and then the responsibility of the opposition to go and find out the saves in their own budget to accommodate it. You'll hold me to account. You'll hold me to account when I present with Susan Lee the coalition's spending priorities, as you should, because our job will be to find saves within our budget. And we look forward to being held to account on just that.
All right, we will do that. Ted O'Brien, thank you for joining us ahead of a busy week ahead.
Thanks very much,
Appreciate
David.
it. All right, well, coming up, we'll look at what we can expect from the Reserve Bank on Tuesday and what would a rate rise mean for the government. First, let's bring our panel back in. Phil Coorey, political editor at the Australian Financial Review, Clare Armstrong, the ABC's chief digital political correspondent, and Waleed Aly, broadcaster and columnist with the 9 papers. Phil, from Ted O'Brien there, just back to where things are at. He's not going to put up his hand if there's a spill, we learnt. He's backing Susan Lee, but clearly does not want to criticise, it would seem, the Conservatives that gathered in Melbourne on Thursday.
No, that was rather disingenuous, wasn't it, Ted? I don't know what they were talking about. Look, you asked the question about, you know, when Ted made the point, if they don't have confidence in the leader, they should step aside. I mean, Angus Taylor hasn't said anything publicly, but by turning up at that meeting, and not just him, but Jonathan Dunham, who was doing the numbers for Hastie, he's the Shadow Home Affairs spokesman. It was a fairly sort of...
And James Patterson there too.
James was there. So it was a fairly sort of obvious vote of no confidence in the leader. It does put them all in this invidious position now, trying to maintain this pattern of unity. You feel like over the next week or 2 weeks or however long before someone pulls the trigger, it just adds to the mess and the... You know, you can't take seriously sort of thing that they're united and will complicate things this week. You know, as we said, with the rates decision on Tuesday and everything else that's going on, the government will be just sort of, you know, it's got so many get-out clauses in Parliament just to go back at them.
The other interesting thing on reunifying these two parties, I found interesting there, Claire, Ted O'Brien's clearly one of those who's been working behind the scenes to stitch things back together. But even he has said there that effectively we could go to the election as a solo party.
Yeah,
and that's certainly the view of some moderates too.
I think it goes a bit further than that, because really if you boil down what happened in the last week or so, the only real hurdle to a reunion is that the Nationals obviously feel that the 3 senators who crossed the floor on the hate speech laws should be reinstated to the shadow cabinet. That's an untenable proposal, not just for the moderates, but also for plenty in the right and across the party room. And if that's the sticking point, then I think a lot of the party room has come to a view now that the separation is going to be for a little bit longer. There are obviously, as you said, moderates who particularly think that it might be for the better in terms of allowing the Liberals to have this sort of rebuilding moment and redefining moment somewhat separate from the Nationals. I find it interesting that Ted said there at the top that he'll let the panel offer commentary on how the coalition and the 2 separate parties are going. I don't think you need to be much of an armchair expert to have a pretty clear idea.
It's the voters.
And I think the voters are very upset about this. And you said before that the moderates feel that Susan needs more time. I think that is true, but I also think they feel that the time is now, as you said to Ted, to start putting some meat on the bones, to start defining some policies, because she stood up after becoming leader at the National Press Club and said that the party needed to win back suburban and inner city voters. It needed to win back young people and women. They've ditched net zero, and they are on the cusp of announcing an immigration policy, which to win any of those kinds of cohorts back, they're going to need to, in the very least, do what Peter Dutton wasn't able to do and link migration to housing. So it's a difficult situation for Susan, but I also think that this idea that, leave the commentary to everyone else, it's pretty obvious to everyone in that party that it's not going well.
100%. But the problem with this idea, though, that they can split and then reform themselves, go their separate ways, appeal to the people they need to appeal to, and then come back together at some future moment. I totally understand the intuitive appeal of it. But the problem is, once you go through that process, you are now in positions that are even further apart. I mean, Clare mentioned net zero. The other one you could have mentioned is gun laws. I mean, you have some of those moderates who were really worried about the way the coalition flat out refused to engage on gun reform in post-Bondi, having an impact in their seats. The problem is not one of management or personalities or even just 1 or 2 policies. It is a deeply ideological rift, especially when you consider the moderate wing, but it is also a demographic. I
think it's a really good point.
Country Australia and City Australia are now 2 different countries, and they are chasing opposite nations. How do you bring...
Well, you do, because you can see the Nats, if they're a solo party, doing things like, zonal tax plans. They've always loved the idea of, and Libs are like, you're crazy. Things like more infrastructure spending on dams. And so you can see, as you say, them going in separate directions.
They'll be fighting one nation.
But, and to your point, though, but I think that by going it alone, the Nationals have lost their most potent argument against one nation and independence, that we're a party of government. They are no longer a party of government. I call them bin chickens, but they're basically they're just now a protest party like everyone else.
And One Nation's protest is more vociferous, and so if you want to protest,
but if the Nationals ever want to be, they cannot. If they ever want to be in government again, and if they want to hold their seats, they have to keep open the spectre of being able to be part of a government. And I thought what was important when Susan Lee put out a statement, it was on Friday, saying if you don't rejoin the coalition, pardon me, by within a week, I'm going to fill your front bench spots with Liberals. That will enshrine the split at least until the next election. But in that statement, she canvassed openly the end of this formal coalition that has existed for how many decades, and posited a scenario a bit like we see in Europe, where they can govern in coalition, and I think that. So it's a fundamental change to the way the coalition has operated. Here in the ACT, we've had this thing in the last couple of weeks where the Liberals and the Greens had talks about governing in coalition to get rid of the Labor government here. And this
that might work in the ACT.
No, it didn't even work here. I don't know. No, but what I'm saying is, we see in Germany and other countries around the world.
But we have a preferential voting system. That's the problem. So that sort of coalitional politics is, its way baked into the electoral systems that prevail in Europe. It just doesn't work here. Which is why, by the way, this is a totally separate issue, but this is why online you're starting to see rumblings from people whose politics are much more to the right, saying let's have first past the post, because they know that's the only way you can really do that. So I just don't see how you can remedy that situation. And there's no clear remedy, because let's say we get to the end of this week and your predictions are right, Phil, and both leaders are in their position. you can't get back together as a coalition because the Nats have said we can't work with Susan Lee
It's this
anymore.
red line that Clare's talking about.
Well, one of the fundamental problems here is Lee and Littleproud despise each other.
Yeah,
let's not.
That's why it's fascinating. They're going to sit down together on Tuesday.
This issue you can track further than the Lee-Littleproud relationship, though. I mean, if you look at the last 30 years of politics, the coalition have either been in government or in opposition, where in the main, Labor in government have been under pressure. This is a unique sort of series of years now where the coalition are both in opposition and existentially under pressure. And the kinds of things that the Nationals have been doing in terms of front-running policy didn't start the day that Susan Lee became leader.
No.
They started the day Peter Dutton became leader. They front-ran on The Voice. They front-ran on divestiture of supermarkets. Nuclear power. All of these policies. I mean, they even tried to push the Libs on tax and regulate vapes. There's been all of these inflection points over the last 4 years of coalition opposition where the Nationals have behaved in this way.
So the Nationals, Colin Boyce. Claire, who is he and why is he?
I feel bad that I keep getting asked in every interview, who is Colin Boyce? So this Central Queensland Nationals member, formerly sat in the state parliament in Queensland and now here, has long had a bee in his bonnet with not just Littleproud, the direction of the party in general. He has a lot of issues with the Liberals. He's quite an isolated figure in that party room. You know, Barnaby Joyce was one of the people that he used to have quite a close relationship to. So I imagine he's feeling even more isolated since Barnaby went to join Pauline. He obviously is unhappy with the situation and feels that it's a moment to make a point. I don't think anyone is seriously talking about Littleproud facing a leadership risk here, but he is obviously trying to create a situation where there is a space to ventilate the angst and concern that he and I think a few others in the Nationals have about how the last couple of weeks have been handled.
There's a bunch of them who are very unhappy they split at all, and you know, I understand the points I think we're all making that. I mean, Colin Boyce is probably right. They could. This is existential for the Nationals. They're facing oblivion.
I'm not crazy,
but he's still not going to get many votes, if any.
No, always beware of the bomb thrower. You know what they can cause and what they can open up. David Littleproud quite clearly would rather not have to do this tomorrow. You know, face a spill motion.
On the split and picking up your questions to Ted about the division of resources, and that Anthony Albanese obviously has this decision to make. My understanding is, at least as of Friday, there was no formal request made from Littleproud to the Prime Minister for a reconsideration around resources. The Prime Minister is sort of indicating that he will make a decision once he gets that request.
Once they finalise what they're doing.
Yeah. Once they finalise what they're doing. But it is a prickly problem for the Prime Minister, who has made quite a point in the last term and now this of really shaving staffing and resourcing away from not just the opposition but also the crossbench. He's been quite traditionalist in what he views as appropriate resourcing for them. So if he bends the rules or I mean, it breaks new ground
I don't think he
on
should.
the Nationals.
I mean, they've done this willingly. I mean, just for the viewers, we're going to have, when Parliament sits on Tuesday, the opposition will be just the Liberal Party now, and there'll be 28 in the House of Representatives, and they've got, well, they're 51 total, so 23 senators or whatever. And then the Nationals will be sitting on the crossbench with the Greens and the Teals and everyone else, and there'll be 28 of them as well, right? So the Liberal Party being the official opposition, yeah, the opposition or the opposing side tends to get 10 questions in question time. At the moment, they're only getting about 7 because as a coalition, they'll get even fewer now. Yeah. But also the Liberal Party will have to fill the entire 30 shadow ministries if, say, this becomes permanent. So you're entitled to extra staff, extra salaries if you're a shadow minister, and Albanese will have all these decisions away. The Nationals will be entitled to staff and a few resources because they'll still be a party, but they won't get the sort of opposition resources. I mean, Albanese is quite within his rights just to sit and do nothing until they sort it out. Well, what are you going to do? Yeah. You make a decision this week and then they reunite, or they, if I was him, I'd do nothing.
I found Ted O'Brien's response really interesting. He said, the one thing we know is Albanese will play politics with this. Okay, sure, take that point.
Doesn't have to.
What I would like to know is, what is the decision that wouldn't be playing politics? Yeah. What's the apolitical decision to make it? Because
just everyone gets more stuff.
Well, I tell you, just related to that, the Remuneration Tribunal is apolitical. They're the independent body that decides who gets, you know, and the shadow ministers do get a loading of, what is it, 40, 50 grand extra. Does the Remuneration Tribunal give all of these new Liberal shadow ministers that loading?
Well, yes. I mean, if they become permanent members of the shadow ministry, yes.
But if it's 28 and 28...
Yeah, but there'll be senators too, so they'll have to give front bench positions in the Senate as well. Someone said to me that if the split becomes permanent and all the Nationals' jobs go, there'll be like 4 people in the Liberal Party without a job, right? They're like they'll either be a minister or a shadow minister,
And there are
shadow
some.
parliament, or a committee chair, and this of course has implications for the leadership because everyone's got jobs to promise on both sides.
It's why some of the Libs currently on the back bench are quite happy to see this separation and get a promotion. Look, let's talk about inflation. Here's what we saw in the latest figures during the week on Wednesday. The peak there is obviously post-COVID. It comes down around election time, and just in the last 6 months of last year, you can see it creeping up, both headline and underlying inflation now above, both of them clearly above the Reserve Bank's target band. Phil, why have we seen inflation creep up like this?
Depends who you talk to, David.
Every economist and 6 opinions.
Yeah, look, there's all the sort of underlying reasons that have been playing out over the last couple of years about supply and supply constraints and all those sorts of things. But you know, obviously the one the government's keen to avoid is that it's playing a contributing role. Sorry, with the spending. I mean, government spending is running very, very high now. I think last year it grew at 5.5%. The economy, that is, as O'Brien said, almost 3 times the rate the economy is growing. Now the Treasurer says we're not doing stimulatory spending, so it's not like they're giving people cash handouts to help with the cost of living, which is directly inflationary. But the economists argue that they're pumping so much money into non-productive areas of the economy, like childcare, for example.
Like the health funding the other day.
Yeah, that's a little different, because that goes to sort of paying for hospitals and stuff. But if you're pouring billions of dollars into subsidising wages and subsidies for families, and we saw childcare costs went up 11%, not helped by this, and then that childcare was one of the factors that fueled this inflation number during the week. So it's sort of an indirect way of pushing it up. You're also crowding out the private sector, you're driving jobs in the non-productive sector of the economy, so it reduces the economy's capacity to absorb all this extra money. So I will be interested on Tuesday, either the RBA is going to lift rates or they're going to say we're going to lift them. And I would be very interested in Michelle Bullock, the RBA governor. She's going to get asked this, obviously. She's going to get asked what influence, if any, the government is having. I think. How
does she navigate that?
She should be honest about it, one way or the other. Either it is or it isn't, or somewhere in the middle.
Well, Jim Chalmers gave a speech over the weekend where he said that the May budget is going to be looking at addressing this persistently high inflation, which I think opens up an interesting, maybe, avenue for the coalition to pursue, or the Liberal Party to pursue rather, which is, okay, maybe let's agree to disagree on what caused this inflation, but here's the government acknowledging maybe there are levers they can pull to address it, which obviously on the flip side is why didn't you pull those levers earlier?
Yeah. But the economists who are arguing government spending is the main contributor. They're talking about childcare and they're talking about health. They're not areas that I think most of the electorate is going to want to see money ripped out of. So then the question will be, where else are you going to go? And that's going to be a very hard question for them to answer. But the problem is also that you look at in some ways, this is a false dichotomy that we like to talk about, because when government spends money, that can have a flow-on effect to the way in which the private economy works. So one of the huge spikes in the inflation data was travel, aviation. Is it Qantas's fault? Is this a private decision, for example, or is this government spending that's going in? There's international factor. The beeflation, we'll call it. That really spiked. That's got to do with Donald Trump's trade policy on beef and what that's done to Australian beef prices or demand in the US.
And energy's a big contributor.
We've just had China now say they're going to put tariffs on Australian beef. Maybe that means beef's going to come down. Like, it is the level, all these levers.
Bottom line, how damaging on Tuesday will this be for the government if we see a rate rise? After all they said at the election last year.
I think it is going to be the defining. It's been very obvious for a while that this issue is going to be the defining feature of this term for the government, the big challenge. It is damaging to have had put so much emphasis last year on the 3 rate cuts and really almost claim credit for them, to try and think that the electorate's going to disassociate when it goes the other way. This is going to put a lot of pressure on the government. And, we've heard Anthony Albanese this week talking about understanding cost of living pressures again. We're right back where we were really when they took office 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, look, at least for the government, it's still relatively early in the term, and you've got an opposition that's the
best time to have.
That helps.
The cost of living, but I mean, the cost of living is still front and centre out there. I mean, we've spent a lot of this show talking about the Liberal Party and stuff. What is happening with the economy will endure beyond the Liberal Party and the coalition.
Most households will be far more focused on
whether the opposition's in any shape or fit shape to actually sort of clean up on this politically is an open.
So what's going to matter then is whether or not if this rate rise, if it happens, and it probably will. We should point out it was likely to happen anyway before this. Yeah. But if that is a one and done thing, or if this is one of a...
The markets are forecasting it too this year, but there's a spectre that the government has lost control of inflation, and they may not be able to control all the factors, but they can help the Reserve Bank sort of, ameliorate. And the firm view amongst the economists is they're not, right? That they're committed to all this spending. I mean, you talked about childcare wallet and cutting spending. It is difficult, but at the same time, it's a legitimate argument to say they shouldn't be adding to it, right? They shouldn't be bringing in new things that are pumping billions more of subsidies into the system because the Prime Minister wants to leave a legacy of universal childcare. It's a great thing.
I understand that, but that's the point.
But should they say, actually, we need to not do that for a couple of years or put that on hold until things are... It's these sorts of decisions to just barge ahead with all this promised spending.
Well, there's a bigger argument about subsidising childcare, whether or not it's effective anyway.
No, I don't want to single out childcare. It's far from the only villain here, but it's...
No, I understand that.
It's an example.
And if you had an opposition that had strong economic credentials, that's exactly the kind of argument.
Because all this stuff got to get paid for in the end. There's always a reckoning.
Look, meanwhile, the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison intervened in the debate about social cohesion during the week. In a speech delivered in Israel, he called for regulation on how Islam is worshipped here in Australia.
The governance of Islamic institutions, religious institutions in Australia is inadequate and requires urgent reform.
This would include a register of public roles, transparency of teachings and foreign funding.
Islamic leaders have a pastoral duty to protect their communities from radicalisation.
His comments were sad and misguided.
I think the Australian Muslim community has to take some responsibility for the behaviours we've seen.
It's incredibly unfair.
I'm advocating reforms that I believe will help religious leaders in our Islamic community keep the wolves from their flock.
So Scott Morrison says Islamic institutions remain fragmented and inconsistently governed in contrast to Christian and Jewish denominations. Waleed, is he right?
Well, they're fragmented, yeah. I don't think it is true to say that that is juxtaposed with Christian communities, because it's not as though the exclusive brethren are being regulated by the High Anglican Church or something like that, right? So you have these different denominations that exist, whereas when someone like Scott Morrison comes to talk about the Muslim community, suddenly they're talking about it as though it's this monolith, this sort of gelatinous block where, well, there's... So this, the problem with this is it's the narrative that appeals to people who know nothing about the Muslim community, which is, well, there are the good ones and the bad ones, and can't the good ones just sort out the bad ones? And it's so much more complicated than that. So this idea is the kind of, if you were serious about something like this, you would probably talk to the Muslim community. You wouldn't go to Israel and a speech.
100%.
Like, it's clearly not, it's for that consumption. It's clearly not a contribution to the Muslim community. And the Muslim community is very upset about this because they go, well, hang on. Firstly, this is more of a narrative that's just, you're a problem that we want to manage somehow, right? And that's really all you are. And by the way, when it comes to radicals within the community or whatever, we've been talking to security agencies about them for ages. And then this rebounds on us and it becomes like, well, why didn't you do anything? So, well, we have been. We absolutely have been. That's not to say there isn't chaos, of course, because there is a huge diversity of opinions. That's life. But with a suggestion like this, it makes no sense because, okay, you want to have some licensing thing and some guy on the books and everyone, okay, fine, all this transparency, let's make Islam a bureaucratic nightmare, fine. Someone just ignores it and opens up a little centre somewhere and what now?
Yeah.
What are we
How's it going to stop that?
here?
It was such a condescending intervention to have been made in the way that it was from where it was. I completely agree. If you are serious about wanting to make a meaningful contribution to social cohesion in this country, you meet people where they are and with respect. You don't stand on the pulpit on the other side of the world and lecture everybody. And I actually found the commentary that you played there from Senator Andrew Bagg very surprising how strongly he backed
it in.
that in. Most Liberals that I spoke to who woke up or saw sort of as they were going to bed that night, Morrison's speech, thought that it was an incredibly unhelpful intervention for the party at the moment, and particularly for Australia more broadly at this time where we are having a conversation about social cohesion.
And speaking of this time, Phil, Australia Day on Monday, we saw rival protests around the country and a couple of really disturbing incidents. There was this bomb allegedly thrown into an Invasion Day protest. Fortunately, did not detonate. It's now being investigated as a potential terrorist act. It was interesting to me that we didn't see politicians or indeed much of the media treating this in the same way that I thought we might.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think everyone was media, but the political reaction was slow. I think it took a couple of days to declare it a terrorist act, didn't it? And
Well, they haven't declared it.
Still investigating.
Right, as a terrorist act.
Well, because the problem with terrorist act is it comes down to motive, and so they've got to. Is it politically motivated?
Sure. But I think it sort of tells just about some of the silent prejudices in society. They're not so silent anymore. But I also do believe in. Not that because it happened in Perth. I'm a big critic of Sydney. Everything happens in Sydney is front page news, no matter how serious.
Yeah.
But sometimes we tend to ignore stuff that happens on the other side of the country. But it was incredibly serious. I mean, had that thing gone off,
well, that's what I think.
Well, because they're Indigenous people largely at that protest. It wasn't as serious. I mean, I think.
And where's the
wake-up call?
And where's the interrogation, setting aside this individual, of the environment and climate that might have inspired them to go and attempt to commit this act? Like, you can set aside the specifics of the individual, even their motivations, but that wouldn't have come from nowhere.
Well,
there's been no interrogation of the cultural impact of, clearly discussions that are happening that people like this find themselves in and go out and allegedly do this.
Because if that logic is good after Bondi.
Yeah, 100%.
Still.
And this has been the case with radicalisation and terrorism for a long, long time. The way in which you can see how pre-existing politics infects our responses is to see how the analyses and the prescriptions change totally when you change the perpetrator or you change the victim. In this case, thankfully nothing happened.
Yeah.
But the police have said, by the way, this wasn't some fake thing.
Yeah.
They've said this was designed to explode. It
was very lucky
and it
that
just
it didn't. Yeah.
So what we're looking at here is everything except the effect. Allegedly, of course.
Our panel, Waleed Aly, Clare, Armstrong, Phil Coorey, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with executive producer for the ABC, Zoe Norton-Lodge, and a very warm welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. There's an old joke that politics is Hollywood for ugly people, and there's certainly been enough drama. Harry Bruce from the Townsville Bulletin, worst remake of Thelma and Louise ever.
Well, you know what Oscar Wilde said, right?
Yeah.
To drive one political party off a cliff may be regarded as misfortune. To drive two off a cliff just looks like carelessness. They remind me of, like those cartoons when it's like they're running off a cliff and they don't realise they're falling.
They hold up the sign, oh dear.
Yes, exactly, yeah, but they're not holding up a sign. It's like they haven't quite realised yet. They're very committed to this drive.
They are. Matt Golding has reverted to the Black Knight from Monty Python, the Monty Coalition and the Quest for the Holy Fail.
It's just a flesh wound. 'Tis but a scratch.
Yep.
I mean, it is a lot like that scene from The Holy Grail, except that, of course, in this one, they've chopped off their own limbs.
It's a whole new plot.
It's a whole new plot.
Zoe, the Liberal drama has been a thriller so far, but not a spiller. Susan Lee's managed to hold on to the top job, but
incredibly,
who knows?
Who knows?
Leadership Open Mixed Troubles, David Rose cartoon, just beautiful.
I mean, I must say, no one here is looking particularly match fit, are they?
No. Who will make the unforced error?
Lovely ball boys, just on the sidelines there, the Nats, just waiting to see what will happen.
Yep. Hasty and Angus versus Susan Lee. It's getting hot in here, boys.
Indeed, and no balls, says Taylor. I mean, look, it's not fair. I'd say between these five people, I can see one ball, so it feels about right.
Lovely Peter Brolman. Susan Lee is just having a little makeover as she's practising some lines here.
Look after our own. Fish and chip shop. Please explain. I don't like it. Australia. Fed up to the back teeth. Please explain. One flag. I mean, you know, what did Coco Chanel say? She said, get dressed and take 2 things off. Like, I'd probably remove the Pauline Hanson wig and the Australian flag.
And meanwhile, Zoe, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has been facing a bit of a horror show as inflation stole the show. He's had a Coco golf meltdown here as he's smashing the racket.
He has. RBA rate hike is locked in.
Yep.
Smash.
I think they should formalise the racket smashing at the Australian Open. Just turn it into like a charity event.
Oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. You could do it. I feel like you'd smash a racket.
I would. I'd get sort of McEnroe as a coach. He was good at it. Zoe, the story of climate change is not topping the box office, but right across the country, it's so hot right now.
It is.
Lovely David Pope cartoon. There's God here is melting Australia. And on the other side of the world, he's freezing.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what this actually reminds me of? When I try to make the kids fish fingers and they're somehow always burnt on one side and frozen on the other.
You need an air fryer, Zoe.
Oh.
Is this thing still under warranty?
I know. I feel like you don't... Your warranty isn't valid if you've completely destroyed the product yourself, I feel. I feel like the planet is no longer under warranty, unfortunately.
Kathy Wilcox has done the weather report here.
Yes. On the bright side, assuming global emissions fall sharply...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very optimistic weather person, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, at least like this sort of end of the world is in like pretty sick colours. This actually reminds me of the fabric of the dress I wore to the Year 10 formal. It was good.
Those colours were in
good.
then, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I thought they were.
Zoe, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Waleed.
I'm going to go internationally. In Beijing, 2 meetings with international leaders of Finland and the UK. Keir Starmer's meeting was really interesting. He spoke about resetting the relationship after an ice age between the UK and Britain, spoke about cultivating a more sophisticated relationship, and then announced, although China wouldn't confirm it, a new set of visa arrangements for UK citizens coming to China in under 30 days. Just put this in the basket of traditional US allies starting to reform themselves in their relationship on trade with the United States that is becoming less and less predictable.
Yeah, the reshaping. Claire.
There was some discussion earlier this week that Kevin Rudd might be exiting the ambassador role early so that he can prepare for a tilt at the UN's top gig. The Prime Minister left it open, saying he'd happily back whatever Australians run for whatever positions. Kevin Rudd then hosed it down, denying that that was his intention. My tip is perhaps he protests too much, and to keep a weather eye on that, I don't think that that dream is completely dead for Kevin Rudd.
Okay.
Remember the blanket denial, he was going to be ambassador. Look, David, I just thought that the other day with Katie Allen's memorial service, it was sad that Katie's memory got overshadowed by that meeting. It's not the first, as James Campbell says, the working funeral, but yeah, she was so much more than a politician, Katie Allen. Actually, she was a lot more than a politician, and she was one of the good people we lost. And another one I'd like to just pay tribute to was Nick Bolkus, who we lost a few weeks ago. Nick had been sick for a while. He was a giant of the Labor movement when I came to Parliament, and he was a good bloke, and sort of, you know, it was very sad, Nick's passing, and sort of condolences to all his family and colleagues. It was we're losing a lot of good people.
Yeah, no, well said, and we pass on those condolences as well. Look, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Good luck. Strap yourselves in for a big week in Parliament. Finally, Anthony Albanese was in Dili this week, and from the front seat of a mini motorcade, he got a lesson from counterpart Janana Gusmao in how to light up democracy, Timorese style. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Oh, yes.
He is. You're making us all feel very excited about being here.